are the three functional regions of the cell? The three main functional regions of the cell are cell membrane, which is the outermost membrane. This cell membrane is present in both plant and animal cells. Okay, a plant cell, in addition to the cell membrane, also has cell wall. Outside the cell membrane, it has cell wall. And at the center of the cell, it has a nucleus, which is a control center of the cell. And the protoplasm that is enclosed by the cell membrane is the cytoplasm. This cytoplasm is a jelly-like substance. This is present in between the cell membrane and the nuclear membrane. Okay, in between this, the jelly-like substance which is present is called as cytoplasm. This cytoplasm encloses a number of membrane-bound cell organelles, and each of these cell organelles have a specific function to perform. The nucleus is the control center of the cell. It controls all the activities of the cell. The heredity information, it contains two different types of nucleic acids, DNA and RNA, and then it will control the information that has to be passed on to the different generations, what are the functions that are performed by an organism, like the amount of hormones and then enzymes, the proteins, all that is decided by that information which is present inside the nucleus. And this cell membrane, the cell membrane is the outermost limiting membrane in case of animal cell. Okay, what are the functions of this cell membrane? The cell membrane has three main functions. The first function of cell membrane is that without a cell membrane, will there be any shape of the cell? No. So which means that the cell membrane is giving shape to the cell. Okay, the cell membrane gives shape to the cell. The second function of cell membrane is, suppose if the cell membrane is not present, if the cell membrane is ruptured, what would happen to the content of the cell? What would happen to the nucleus? What would happen to the cytoplasm? All this will get lost, isn't it? Even a foreign material like bacteria or any organisms, any toxic material that is present outside also can enter into the cell, isn't it? So, a foreign material can easily enter. That means there will not be any protection to the cell if there is no cell membrane. So, the second function of the cell is that the cell membrane protects the content of the cell. That is, it is protecting the protoplasm, it is protecting the cytoplasm and the nucleus of the cell. The third function of the cell, very important function of the cell. The third function of the cell membrane, very important function. This cell membrane is also called as a selectively permeable membrane. This is called as a selectively permeable membrane. The reason is that it selects what materials has to enter the cell or what materials has to move out of the cell. All that is present in the environment cannot enter into the cell. The bacteria, toxic substances, carbon dioxide, all that will not be permitted into the cell. What is it blocking from entering? This cell membrane. And what is not required, the waste that is produced, the carbon dioxide that is produced inside the cell is sent out of the cell. Again it is sent out of the cell through the cell membrane. So the cell membrane is allowing what materials has to enter the cell, and then it is deciding what materials has to move out of the cell. Okay. For example, like water. Water is required by the cell. So it is permitted into the cell. Glucose is required by the cell. So it is permitted into it. So this cell membrane, which is a porous membrane, will select what has to enter into the cell and what has to move out of the cell. So what is required by the cell? Oxygen is required by it. So it is permitted in. Carbon dioxide, which is produced as a result of cellular respiration, is sent out of the cell. Waste substances are sent out of the cell. So all that useful substance which is present in the cell is not permitted out. All that is useful for the cell are permitted into the cell. So for this, the cell membrane is a porous membrane. If anything has to pass through it, it should be a porous membrane. So the cell membrane is a porous membrane. It is a trilamellar membrane. That is, it means it is made up of 3 layers of lipids and proteins. Okay, a trilamellar layer, and it is a flexible membrane. The cell membrane is a living membrane, it is a flexible membrane, it is a porous membrane, and It is a selectively permeable membrane. Cell membrane is present in both plant and animal cells. Besides this cell membrane, only in case of plant cells, animal cells do not have cell wall. There is one more protective layer that is present around the cell membrane in case of plant cell, and that is called as cell wall. Unlike this cell membrane, the cell wall is a dead layer. It is made up of cellulose. Cell membrane is made up of lipids and proteins. Cell wall is made up of cellulose. Cell membrane is living, cell wall is dead. Okay, cell wall is dead. And cell membrane is semi-permeable, whereas cell wall is completely permeable. This is completely permeable. It will allow everything inside. But here there is something checking. The cell membrane will check what has to enter, what has to exit. Right? So this is the differences between cell wall and cell membrane, and also the three functional regions which we are going to learn in detail in the next class.